New Year's Eve was meant for a fresh start, evicting my manipulative mother-in-law. But the gift we gave her at midnight revealed a devastating secret about our home, unraveling more than just a champagne flute. The champagne flute felt cold and fragile in my hand, a stark contrast to the fire raging in my stomach. Around me, our home was a picture of New Year's Eve perfection. Twinkling fairy lights were draped over every surface. The scent of pine and roast beef hung in the air, and the low hum of cheerful chatter filled the rooms. My husband, Mark, was circulating, a perfect host with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He caught my gaze from across the living room and gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It was almost time. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. From her throne, my favorite armchair, of course, my mother-in-law, Carol, held court. She'd been living with us for exactly 1 year to the day. She'd arrived on New Year's Day last year with 2 suitcases and a mountain of sob stories about being lonely and frail after my father-in-law passed. It was supposed to be for a month. A month turned into 3, then 6, and now a full 365 days of her passive-aggressive tyranny had passed. "Jessica, darling," she called out, her voice cutting through the pleasant buzz of the party. "This punch is a little sweet, isn't it? Almost syrupy." She took a demonstrative, delicate sip from her glass, her lips puckered as if she'd just tasted poison. Several of Mark's cousins glanced over, their expressions a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity. I forced a smile that felt like cracking porcelain. "I'm so sorry you don't like it, Carol. I followed your recipe." A lie, of course. Her recipe called for an entire bottle of corn syrup. Mine used fresh squeezed juice. But saying it out loud served its purpose. It painted her as the ungrateful matriarch. Her eyes narrowed for a fraction of a second before her saccharine smile snapped back into place. "Oh, you dear girl, you try so hard. It's just that your palate is a little unrefined. It's not your fault." She turned to Mark's aunt beside her. "She was raised on canned soup, you know. Bless her." I felt my knuckles turn white around the stem of my glass. This was her signature move. The public dig, disguised as a compliment, designed to remind everyone that I wasn't born into their world of country clubs and generational wealth. I was the scholarship kid Mark brought home, and in her eyes, I'd never be good enough to be the lady of her son's house. She conveniently forgot that I was the one who paid the mortgage on this house, with the money from the business I built from the ground up. Mark had started to see it, thank God. It took months of her accidental insults, of her rearranging my kitchen, of her going through my mail, of her telling our 7-year-old son, Leo, that mommy works too much to really love you properly. The breaking point came last week when I found her feeding Leo a full-sugar soda right before bed, after his dentist had explicitly warned us about his cavities. When I confronted her, she'd laughed. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Jessica. A little joy never hurt anyone. You're so rigid. It's a wonder Mark can stand it." That night, for the first time, Mark didn't make excuses. He saw the cold, calculated cruelty in her eyes. He saw the way she was intentionally undermining my authority as a mother in my own home. We talked until 3 in the morning, and by the time the sun rose, the decision was made. We weren't asking her to leave. We were telling her. And we decided to do it on the 1-year anniversary of her arrival, a day she was planning to commemorate with a toast to family and generosity. The irony was just too perfect to resist. Now, the clock on the mantelpiece showed 11:58, the final countdown. Guests started gathering, champagne being topped off. I slipped away to the study and retrieved the gift. It was a beautiful, deep blue box from a high-end department store, tied with a thick silver ribbon. It looked expensive. It looked like a peace offering. I walked back into the living room just as the countdown began. 10, 9, 8. People were grabbing their partners, their faces bright with hope for the coming year. Mark met me by the fireplace, his hand finding the small of my back. His palm was sweaty, but his grip was firm. 7, 6, 5. He leaned in and whispered, "Are you ready?" I looked over at Carol, who was beaming, raising her glass as if she were the queen celebrating her own reign. 4, 3, 2. I nodded, my resolve hardening into steel. 1. A chorus of "Happy New Year" erupted through the house. Couples kissed, friends hugged, and the first notes of Auld Lang Syne began to play. In the midst of the joyful chaos, I made my way to Carol's armchair. Mark followed, a silent, supportive shadow. "Happy New Year, Carol," I said, my voice dangerously sweet. She looked up, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "And to you, dear, another wonderful year together under one roof. We are so blessed." "We are," I agreed, holding out the beautifully wrapped box. "And to show our appreciation for everything you've contributed, this past year we got you something very special, a gift to help you get a fresh start in the new year." Her eyes lit up. She adored presents, especially ones given in front of an audience. She took the box from me with a greedy little snatch. "Oh, you shouldn't have. Mark, you spoil your old mother." She placed her champagne flute on the side table and began to untie the silk ribbon with a flourish, milking the moment for all it was worth. The room quieted slightly, people watching the matriarch receive her tribute. She lifted the lid, her smile wide and expectant. Inside, nestled on a bed of white tissue paper, was a single, crisp, tri-folded document. Her smile faltered, replaced by a look of confusion. This wasn't a necklace or a spa voucher. She picked it up, her manicured fingers fumbling slightly. She unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the heading, "Official Notice to Vacate," and the crystal champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor with a sound that seemed to echo the breaking of our family. The silence that followed the shatter was louder than any music. Every eye in the room was fixed on the triangle of drama by the armchair. Me, Mark, and his mother, staring at the legal document as if it were a dead rat in the middle of her party. The festive atmosphere evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating tension. People froze, glasses halfway to their mouths, conversations dying on their lips. It was exquisite. Carol's head snapped up, her eyes dark and furious, locking onto Mark. She completely ignored me. To her, I was just the puppet. He was the one pulling the strings. "Mark," she whispered, her voice a theatrical, trembling thing. "Tell me this is one of Jessica's sick jokes. Tell me my own son wouldn't do this to me, on New Year's Eve." Mark stepped forward, placing himself slightly in front of me. It was a small gesture, but it was everything. "It's not a joke, Mom," he said, his voice steady, though I could feel the tremor in the hand he still had on my back. "We've given you a year. It's time for you to find your own place. We'll help you, of course. We'll pay the first few months' rent and the deposit." "Help me?" she shrieked, the frail old woman act vanishing in a puff of smoke. The real Carol emerged, all venom and fire. She shot to her feet, the notice clutched in her fist. "You want to help me by throwing me out onto the street? After everything I've done for you, after I raised you, sacrificed for you?" Her gaze finally swung to me, burning with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "This is you. I knew it the day he brought you home. A little gold-digging parasite, whispering poison in his ear until you finally turned him against his own mother." A few guests gasped. Mark's Aunt Patty, Carol's sister, rushed to her side. "Carol, dear, calm down. Let's not make a scene." "I will make a scene," Carol screeched, her face contorted. "She's trying to steal my family, steal my son, my grandson." That's when people started to leave. It began as a trickle, a cousin muttering about an early morning, a colleague of Mark's suddenly remembering a babysitter. Soon it was a flood. Awkward goodbyes were mumbled in our direction, while sympathetic hugs and whispers were lavished on Carol, who was now dabbing at her dry eyes with a cocktail napkin, resuming her role as the tragic heroine. I just stood there, a statue in the eye of the hurricane, letting them go. Good. I wanted no witnesses for what came next. Within 10 minutes, the house was empty, save for the three of us. The half-eaten food and abandoned drinks looked like relics of a party that had happened a lifetime ago. The only sound was the faint tinny echo of "Auld Lang Syne" from a neighbor's house. Carol's demeanor shifted again. The hysterics were gone, replaced by a chilling reptilian stillness. She smoothed the crumpled notice on the mantelpiece, her movements precise and deliberate. 30 days, she read aloud, a humorless smirk playing on her lips. That's very generous. But there seems to be a slight misunderstanding. There's no misunderstanding, I said, finding my voice. You have 30 days to gather your things and leave our home. She turned from the mantelpiece to face me fully. The look in her eyes was one of pure, condescending pity, the kind a queen might give to a court jester who'd just told a terrible joke. "Oh, you poor, foolish girl," she cooed. "You think this is your home, so you can just kick me out like some unwanted tenant?" "That's exactly what you are," Mark cut in, his jaw tight. "Mom, this is over. We're not arguing about it. The decision is made." Carol let out a low, cold laugh that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "You can't make this decision, Mark, because you two have made a fatal error in your little coup." She picked up the legal notice between her thumb and forefinger as if it were contaminated. "This document," she said, waving it gently, "is completely worthless. You can't evict me." I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. Was there some loophole, some obscure law we didn't know about? "And why not?" I challenged, trying to keep my voice from shaking. She held my gaze, her smile widening into a triumphant sneer. She turned her eyes to her son, a flicker of something dark and possessive in them. "Because, darling Jessica, I'm not a guest in this house. I'm an owner. Tell her, Mark. Tell your clever little wife about the $50,000 I gave you for the down payment. Tell her it wasn't a gift. It was my investment. You can't evict your mother from the house she helped buy." The air in the room became thin, unbreathable. I turned to Mark, my head swimming. $50,000. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, a frantic drumbeat against Carol's smug silence. Mark's face had gone pale, a ghostly white that made his freckles stand out like flecks of dirt. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He was staring at the floor, at the spot where the champagne glass had shattered, as if he could see the cracks spiderwebbing through our entire life. "Mark?" I prompted, my voice barely a whisper. "What is she talking about?" He finally looked at me, his expression a wretched mix of guilt and fear. "Jess, I can explain." "Explain what?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Explain that you took $50,000 from her behind my back? Explain that my mother-in-law, the woman I've been fighting with for a year, is a part owner of my house?" My house. The one I'd poured my life savings into, the profits from my company, my sweat and my sleepless nights. "It wasn't like that," he said, running a hand through his hair. "It was when we were first buying it. The bank was being difficult about the last bit of the down payment. My savings were tied up. Mom offered to help. She said it was an early inheritance, a gift to help us get started." "A gift?" Carol scoffed, folding her arms. "I said I wanted to help. I said I wanted to invest in my son's future, in this family's foundation. It was a verbal agreement, just as binding." A verbal agreement? Was she insane? But the sick feeling in my gut told me it didn't matter if it was legally binding. What mattered was the lie. The secret Mark had kept from me for 5 years. He had let me believe we built this life together, on our own terms. But all along, she'd had a stake in it, a leash, and now she was pulling it tight. "You lied to me," I said, the words feeling like ash in my mouth. I wasn't speaking to Carol anymore. She was just background noise. The only person in the room was my husband. "For 5 years, you let me believe this was ours. Every time she made a comment about my background, about my money, you stood there and said nothing, knowing she held this over us, over me." "I was going to tell you," he pleaded, taking a step towards me. I took a step back. The time was never right. At first, I was embarrassed that I couldn't cover it myself. And then, she was just Mom. I never, ever thought she would use it like this. I swear, Jess. "Of course you didn't," Carol purred, sauntering over to the drinks cart and pouring herself a generous measure of brandy. "Because you're a good boy, Mark. You see the best in people, unlike some of us." She took a long, slow sip, her eyes locked on me over the rim of the glass. "So, you see, this changes things. I'm not going anywhere. In fact, I think I'll be making a few changes around here. This wallpaper in the hall, for instance. It's dreadfully dreary. I think a nice damask print would be much more appropriate for a house of this stature." The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. She wasn't just staying. She was redecorating. She was claiming her territory. I felt a surge of rage so hot it almost made me dizzy. This woman had spent a year systematically trying to dismantle my confidence, my marriage, and my relationship with my own child, all from the comfort of a home I paid for, and now she was claiming it as her own. "Get out," I said, my voice low and shaking with fury. Carol raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I'm sorry, I don't think I heard you correctly." "I said get out," I repeated, stepping forward, invading her space. "I don't care if you gave us $1 million. This is my home. You are a toxic, manipulative woman, and you are not welcome here another minute." "Jessica, calm down," Mark said, trying to put his hand on my arm. I shook it off. "No, I will not calm down. Your mother just blew up our lives with a secret you kept from me, and you want me to calm down?" I turned back to Carol. "You have until the end of the month, just like the notice says. If you're not gone by then, I will get a lawyer. We will sell this house, and I will personally hand you your check for $50,000 on the curb." Carol's smile didn't waver. It was serene, beatific. It was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "Oh, I don't think so," she said softly. "You see, you can't sell the house without my permission, and you can't force me out, and you really, really don't want to get lawyers involved." She took another delicate sip of her brandy. "Because my investment wasn't the only secret being kept in this house. Mark has been keeping a much bigger one from you, haven't you, my son?" I froze, my blood running cold. I looked at Mark. All the color had drained from his face again, but this time it was different. This was raw, primal fear. He was looking at his mother with an expression of pure terror. Carol set her glass down with a soft click. "It seems my boy hasn't been entirely honest about his finances. Not just with you, but with his business partner either. You should ask him, Jessica. Ask him where the rest of the money for this house really came from." The silence Carol left in her wake was a living thing, thick with unspoken betrayals. She glided out of the room, her victorious smirk a parting shot, leaving me and Mark alone in the wreckage of our new year. The question she had thrown between us hung in the air, heavy and poisoned. "The rest of the money?" I echoed, my voice flat. "What is she talking about, Mark? What other money?" He sank onto the sofa, his head in his hands. His shoulders were shaking. He looked broken, a stranger in the house we had built on a foundation of lies. "It was from my business," he mumbled into his palms. "From the company account. It was supposed to be a short-term loan. I paid it all back, every cent." The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. His business. The web design company he ran with his best friend, David. "You embezzled from your own company?" I whispered, horrified. "To buy this house? You stole from David?" "I paid it back," he insisted, his head snapping up, his eyes wild with desperation. "It took me 2 years, skimming from my own salary, but I put it all back. No one ever knew, except Mom. I confided in her when I was panicking about making the last payment. She's the one who told me to do it. She said it was borrowing from my own future earnings." Of course she did. It was the perfect blackmail, the ultimate leash. She had armed herself with a secret that could destroy his career, his reputation, and his most important friendship, all to secure her own position of power. She hadn't just invested $50,000 in our house. She'd invested in 50,000 pounds of leverage against her own son. And by extension, me. That was it. That was the moment the rage solidified into something cold, hard, and sharp. The grief and the shock were still there, but beneath them was a core of pure, unadulterated resolve. She thought she had won. She thought she could sit back in her armchair and watch me crumble, watch our marriage disintegrate, and then swoop in to pick up the pieces, redecorating the house and raising my son. She had underestimated me for the last time. I walked over to him, my heels clicking decisively on the hardwood floor. I knelt in front of him, forcing him to look at me. "Are you telling me the absolute truth, Mark? Is there anything else? Any other lie? Any other secret she has on you?" He shook his head, tears streaming down his face now. "No. That's it. That's the worst of it. Jess, I'm so sorry. I was stupid and scared, and I let her convince me it was okay." "Okay," I said, my voice eerily calm. "Okay." I stood up. "Here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow morning, you are going to call David. You're going to tell him everything, and then you are going to call your mother. For the next 2 weeks, our house was a war room. The festive decorations came down, replaced by stacks of financial documents. Mark made the call to David, and it was as brutal as we expected. David was furious, hurt, and felt utterly betrayed. But Mark didn't make excuses. He took full responsibility, showing him the records of how he'd paid it all back. He offered to sign over a larger percentage of the company to him. It was a long, painful process, but their friendship, miraculously, began to mend under the weight of total, agonizing honesty. My part of the plan was quieter, but far more devious. I spent days with our lawyer and a forensic accountant. We went through every single one of my business records and our joint accounts since the day we bought the house. And there, buried in the transaction history from 5 years ago, we found it. A wire transfer. $50,000. It came from Carol's bank account, but it wasn't a simple transfer. It was a payment. The memo line, which I'd never thought to look at before, read, "Payment for art consultation services." Art consultation services? Carol wouldn't know a Monet from a placemat, but I did. Before I started my tech company, my first business, my passion was a small art advisory firm. I helped wealthy clients build their collections. I'd even helped Carol's sister Aunt Patty buy a few pieces years ago. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. I pulled the invoice from my old files. 5 years ago, I had invoiced Carol for 48 hours of consultation and sourcing for 2 specific paintings she claimed she wanted to buy as an investment. She had dragged me to a dozen galleries, monopolized my time, and then, after I'd done all the work, she'd suddenly changed her mind. She never paid the invoice, and I, trying to keep the peace with my new mother-in-law, had let it go. But I never forgot the work I did. And she hadn't just forgotten. She had used my own invoice as a way to launder the money into our lives, creating a paper trail that made her investment look like a legitimate payment for services rendered. It was brilliant in a sociopathic sort of way. It was also her undoing. On January 30th, 2 days before the eviction deadline, we called a family meeting. Carol arrived in the living room, smug and triumphant, with Aunt Patty in tow for moral support. She probably expected Mark to beg, for me to be in tears. Instead, she found me sitting at the dining room table, a stack of papers in front of me. Mark stood behind me, his hand on my shoulder, a united front. "We've reviewed your claim," I began, my voice as crisp and cool as the legal documents in front of me. "And we are prepared to honor our debt to you." I pushed a cashier's check across the table. "Here is your $50,000, with 5 years of interest, compounded annually. We're also paying you back for every meal you ate in this house and a generous nightly rate for your stay. It's all itemized." Carol stared at the check, then at me, her eyes narrowing. "This doesn't change anything. This is still my house." "Actually, it isn't," I said, sliding another document towards her. "This is the invoice you never paid from my art consultation firm 5 years ago. An invoice for $50,000. The wire transfer you sent us was payment for that invoice. It wasn't an investment in our home. It was you settling a business debt with me. You have no legal claim to this property whatsoever." Aunt Patty gasped, her eyes wide. She looked from the invoice to her sister. Carol's face went through a remarkable series of transformations, from confusion to dawning horror to incandescent rage. "This is absurd. This is a fabrication." "Is it?" I asked sweetly. "I wonder what the IRS would think of a $50,000 business transaction that you never declared. Tax evasion is a serious crime for someone on a fixed income, Carol." Checkmate. The color drained from her face. She had no move left. She looked at Mark, a desperate, final appeal in her eyes. "Mark, are you going to let her do this to your own mother?" Mark looked down at her, his expression not of anger, but of a deep, profound sadness and finality. "You did this to yourself, Mom," he said quietly. "The notice stands. You have until tomorrow at 5 p.m. to remove your belongings from our home." And just like that, the rain was over. The next day, she was gone. The silence she left behind wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was light. It was clean. It felt like fresh air after a year in a sealed tomb. It took time for Mark and me to rebuild, but we did it with brutal honesty. No more secrets. We started fresh, on a foundation that was, finally, truly our own. And as we stood in our living room that evening, watching the sunset paint the walls, I raised a glass of water. "Happy New Year," I said to my husband, and for the first time in a very long time, it truly was.